Getting set for UFC Fight Night, Benavidez, Figueiredo, number 2. We have a rematch for the flyweight title in our main event. Kicking off the prelims, we have a couple of guys that you might be familiar with, you might not be familiar with, and if you're not familiar with them, you probably don't know. The gentleman on the left, we have Carlos Felipe making his UFC debut, taking on the Polar Bears, Sergey Spivak. And Matt, for Sergey Spivak, this is 4th time out with the promotion. Lost in his debut to Walt Harris. That's a tough debut. Then he took on a tough test in Tai Tuivasa overseas, and he beat Tai Tuivasa. A really good fight there for Spivak. Then in his last time out, took on Marcin Tybura, and Tybura is just kind of a wet blanket, so it's a tough fight to try and gauge what you're going to get out of Sergey Spivak. A guy who has a background in judo and sambo, and we saw it especially in that fight against the tough out in Tai Tuivasa. Now, Carlos Felipe is coming in here, making the debut. He hasn't fought since 2017, due in part to a 2-year USADA suspension. He says it was fat burners, caffeine pills. He tested positive for stanozolol. You don't want to have that one in your system. But if you look at it in total, a lot of finishes on the Brazilian regional scene. If you go back and watch some of the fight tape, he has good boxing. That's one of those major things to look for with Carlos Felipe. Always pushing the pace. And even if you take him down, he has the wherewithal to get back to his feet and continue that game plan of boxing. Now, I listened to an interview with We Are MMA, so give credit where credit is due on Felipe. He said that he's been training at home during quarantine. You look at it, he hired 2 heavyweights to come live with him full-time and trained for this one. And he called out Rafael Pessoa if he gets a win. So an interesting all-Brazil card or all-Brazil fight if Felipe gets the win. But Matt, this is one of those ones where the odds came out, and actually opening odds favored Felipe in this one. He's a -130 favorite, Spivak a +110 underdog. Those roles are reversed in major fashion. Spivak a -140 favorite right now, Felipe sitting at a +115. What do you make of this one? Because again, Felipe was a guy that they signed in 2017. He pops, he gets a USADA suspension, and then they sign him again after the suspension's over. He's been booked in different fights. He was booked to fight Jeff Hughes earlier on. That one fell out. Booked against Spivak in May. That one fell out due to COVID. Now we get this one here. What do you make of this fight? And is it too tough of a task for Felipe in his debut?
Well, it's just so hard to tell because we haven't seen him fight in 3.5 years, which is kind of crazy. So for him to be making his debut at Fight Island, this is such a hyped up event, really. And I understand Fight Island kind of loses a little bit of its excitement after the initial event, but still, it's a big event. A lot of eyes, especially on these next 2 cards. The one Wednesday night, I guess, since we're shooting this on Monday, and then the one on Saturday, this event. So it will be really interesting to see. We talk about octagon jitters a lot, though, but I do think that the case without, like, there's no crowd, everything's a little bit different. I don't know if those octagon jitters are going to come into effect as much as they normally would, with 20,000 people screaming a bunch of nonsense, but Sergey Spivak's legit pretty good, and put it this way, I would have much rather the Jeff Hughes fight for Carlos Felipe in his first fight over the Sergey Spivak, just because with Spivak, you kind of know what you're going to get. You would use the term wet blanket for Marcin Tybura. Sergey Spivak kind of does the same thing. He just wasn't as good as Tybura at them, because can he take the fight to the ground? Yes, he can. Can he get back up from the bottom? Not really. And can he strike? He's more of a volume guy at heavyweight. 2 really young heavyweights too, by the way. Both guys 25 years old. And at heavyweight, I mean, you can fight till you're 43, 44, 45, really. So
sidebar, Sergey Spivak, the WWFC champ before he came into the UFC. He had wins when he got that belt against Travis Fulton, Folk Hero, who at the time was 255, 53, and 10. And then his last fight with WWFC fought the one and only Tony Lopez, who at the time was 61 and 28. I'm sure both those guys have probably fought 20 or 30 more times since then. But that's one of those things that I'd like to tie in with this one. Because Travis Fulton and Tony Lopez are guys that have, they fought like a who's who of guys. And if you can get a win off a guy like that, yeah, it's not UFC caliber talent, but it still gives you a decent barometer of the fact that Spivak can beat guys that he should beat. And he's going to lose to the Walt Harrises of the world, or even in his last fight. I mean, it was a tough one against Marcin Tybura, who, wet blanket. He's like he's a 10 to 15 guy on his best day. And I mean, we saw that at UFC 251, getting a weird win over Maxim Grishin. But in this one, to me, Sergey Spivak, it's the background, the judo and the sambo. If he can close the distance, I know Felipe is a good striker, this and that, but if he can close the distance and grind on him, I think that's where you're going to see Spivak getting a win. We saw that in the fight against Tai Tuivasa, and Tai Tuivasa is one of those guys, I'm going to use this term a lot during these picks. He's so happy with his hands that he kind of throws caution to the wind. I think Spivak in this one's going to be able to do the same thing with Felipe, as long as Felipe isn't too tentative in this debut. And listen, I'd understand it if he is, because he's been off for 3 years plus. But yeah, for me, it's Spivak. I'm not surprised at all that the odds swayed so much. They've actually swayed more than any other fight since they've been announced on this card. What's your pick here?
Oh, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Sergey Spivak, from what we've seen, yes, he doesn't really beat the upper echelon, but at least he's been active as of late, and that's really all you can ask for. And anytime a guy's coming back over a 3+ year layoff, you really have to worry. Dominic Cruz can barely even do it, and he's one of the greatest fighters ever. So if he can't pull it off, I really doubt that Carlos Felipe is going to be able to get the jump on Sergey Spivak. I don't think this is going to be the most exciting fight of the evening. I know people like to get excited for the heavyweights, but if Spivak wants to win, he kind of has to make it boring. Really grind Felipe up against the cage, go for the takedowns. If he gets back up, just kind of rinse and repeat, do it again and again, and he should be able to get a unanimous decision, I would think.
Matt, both going with Sergey Spivak to get the win here. You're not going to want to miss the rest of our predictions for the card, including an extended look at the main event, the rematch between Davison Figueiredo and Joseph Benavidez. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it.